So good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am Solazar, and on behalf of District Director Shamala Sista and Program Quality Director Kalpana Arota and TLI Chair Jackie Law, I want to welcome you to the District 101 Summer TLI Sessions. Now, this session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your video. If your video is on, we take it as an agreement to be recorded. The online TLIs are intended to provide information that helps bring your leadership and communication skills to the next level. Tonight's presenter will share with us guidelines for the mindset needed to deal with disaster and change in our lives. We ask you to stay muted. If you have a question, please enter your question in the chat. Our TLI Chair Jackie Law and I will monitor questions and provide them to Patrick during the Q&A portion of the presentation. But we do ask that you not engage in other chats in the chat. Use it for sending us the questions so we can identify them and pick them out. Now, a presenter is a distinguished Toastmaster. He's a former national debate champion. He likes to win the argument, and he's a public speaking gold medalist. He began his Toastmaster journey in 2005 in Orange County, California. And in 2012, he became not only the 65th person to achieve Toastmasters' highest award, the Accredited Speaker, he was also the youngest to ever earn the Accredited Speaker designation. He's visited over 1,100 Toastmaster clubs on 3 continents. He's visited 43 states and is in the process of writing a blog about his travels. He's the CEO of one of the largest disaster preparedness companies in the United States. Now, Patrick is recognized as one of the world's premier experts in emergency planning and was invited to Washington, D.C. as a national private sector representative. With his presentation, What to Do When Disaster Strikes, let's welcome accredited speaker, distinguished Toastmaster, Patrick Hardy.
Thank you, everyone. You know, in 1906, during the massive earthquake in San Francisco, there was a gentleman who was sitting a lot like I am now. He was wondering what he should do because during the earthquake, everyone around him had been affected. There were businesses that had been leveled. There were people who were homeless, and he wanted to help. And he ran a little bank called the Bank of Italy. And he thought, even though I run a little bank, I'm not as large as many of the other ones. I'm not as large as Wells Fargo. I'm not as large as JP Morgan, but I can still make some kind of contribution. So he looked out his window and he decided what he was going to do was he was going to change things. He didn't ask anybody's permission. He didn't wait. He didn't try to hope to find the right time to do it. He wasn't going to try to do anything else but what he felt would be something that would empower his community. So he and his 2 assistant managers at the bank took the entire safe out of the bank and they dragged it completely into the street. And then he took the combination and he opened that safe and he placed a table in front. He placed 3 chairs and he placed 3 ledger sheets for him and his 2 managers. And they sat there and they waited for anybody who would pass by. And anyone who came by asking for a loan, anyone who came to him asking for money who needed it, all they had to do was sign their name on the ledger sheet and he would place his hand into the safe and he handed them money. And he did that all with the agreement of a handshake. That's the true definition of empowerment and disaster preparedness. But before I really get into that, I want to thank Jackie Law. I want to thank Solazar. I want to thank all of you from Toastmasters District 101. I have visited many times. I've been to Saratoga Toastmasters. I've been to a few others. I really love, in fact, that club is on my top 10 list of my favorite clubs because actually when I showed up at that club, it was really funny. I pretended like I didn't know anything about Toastmasters and the room was full. It was Saturday and I sat in the very back and they were doing the meeting and then they were doing this round of applause, and then I ended up talking a little bit about the club, and the club did something I did not expect. The club completely welcomed me in there. They actually invited me to sit at the table, and I actually helped facilitate the meeting. I ran I did a table topics. It was really fun. It was the kind of meeting where the energy and the dynamics, that's what I remember about that club. The number of people who were there, the people who were being supportive, not just the ones who stood on the stage, not just the ones who were called the Toastmaster or the general evaluator or speaker number one or speaker number two or speaker number three. It was the people in the room who said, I'm there to support those around me. In fact, I distinctly remember that club because, for those of you who know, Toastmasters has, since 1957, had a very famous tradition that when you finish, and of course we're now into the new education program, but when you completed your competent communicator, those first 10 speeches, there's a tradition in Toastmasters. And that tradition is we stand up and give them a standing ovation. And that's something that I actually helped them lead in the beginning, because I actually said, this is something that we do. And instead of someone's telling me, who are you? How dare you tell me how to run my club? You just were off the street. They actually embraced that, and they saw that as an opportunity to be able to actually engage their members and empower them. And today, that's why I'm so honored to be able to address you. I apologize for what I'm wearing today. We're doing hurricane preparedness in Louisiana. It is very busy time of year. It's a time when we tend to get a lot of hurricanes, we get a lot of storms, and this is the time when we are extraordinarily busy. I normally have my hair gelled, but in Louisiana, I don't know how many of you have ever been in the deep south in the summertime. It is, if nothing else, it is very humid. And when it is very humid, there is no amount of gel that will ever keep your hair in place. So I really appreciate the chance to be able to address you today. And I hope you enjoy this, because I've been an emergency manager for 18 years. And my father was also a disaster planner. My father was the head of business continuity for, I don't know how many of you have been down to Los Angeles at the Getty Museum. My father was head of business continuity at the Getty Museum, and then he was at the University of Southern California, as well as the entire Cal State university system. So my father actually ran the business continuity program for all of the campuses up and down the state. And I have learned a lot of things about disasters and about Toastmasters that give us that synergy. And that story I told you about that banker from the Bank of Italy who had moved into San Francisco, that is a lesson that I want us to take away and talk about when we discuss disaster preparedness. So now I'm going to switch, because I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, because I want you to kind of see how we're going to do emergency preparedness and how we're going to implement those lessons into Toastmasters clubs, because I really want to talk to you first about how are we going to actually prepare, how are we actually going to prepare people for disasters, and how is that going to specifically apply to our clubs. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. This is the beginning and the end of every element of disaster preparedness. My company works in 53 vertices. I work with nursing homes. I work with bars. I work with alligator farms. I work with any kind of business, anything you can imagine. If there's anything I have learned about America, it is that people have found the most unique ways of making money. I've worked with comedy clubs in Phoenix. I have worked with magic houses in New York. I have been to secret fraternity meetings before where I was not allowed to know where the headquarters was. I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. That was quite an experience. I have been underwater. Next year, the Chilean Navy is picking me up, and I'm going to be taking me to Antarctica, because I will be doing a disaster plan in Antarctica. And I do disaster planning for high net worth families. I do them for all kinds of individuals. And no matter what presentation I'm delivering, I always start with this. And I not only started with this with disaster preparedness, I think it's the same when we deal with Toastmasters and dealing with change, because disasters ultimately do one thing. And this is what I tell people. Disasters do one thing. They force you to change. They force you to change. And I'll give you a great example. if I were to poll you all right now, I don't know what all of you do for a living. I don't know if you're lawyers or you're architects or you run a business or you're teachers. If in December of 2019, and I run a disaster company, if I were to turn to you and say, listen, let's write up a pandemic plan for you. Let's get a pandemic plan in place because, we could have a pandemic at any time. How many of you think that you would actually buy a pandemic plan from me? How many of you actually think, I would be really well, other than Solazar, of course, other than him, would anyone actually be involved or think about pandemic planning? And the answer is no. But of course, if we're talking about June of 2020 or June of 2021, then that would be different. And I'm not trying to sell anybody. Instead, what I'm trying to say is it forced the world to think that I might have to pivot my entire life. Everything that I'm doing in my life is going to change. In just about a month, little over a month, we're going to celebrate the 20th anniversary. Does anyone know what event I'm talking about that's going to be happening in 20 years? What happened 20 years ago in September? It was 9/11, right? Anyone remember what all the newspapers were saying the days after and what you saw from the talking heads? What did they all say? The world is what? Going to change forever, right? Everything is going to be different. And that's one of the things that is going to be really important that disasters do for you, is that they force you to think differently about things. When you were in Toastmasters and you were in clubs, I have seen clubs where people have gotten into fistfights. I have seen times where they have had to kick out a president. In fact, I was actually traveling in Florida, and a club, I was visiting clubs, and I was just doing my usual goodwill tour kind of thing, just for fun. And someone said, we have to kick out the president of our club and we need a neutral person to sit in the trial. Would you be willing to do that? And I agreed to do that. And again, I did that because this is a challenging time. And in that instance, the president had embezzled money, a significant amount of money, about $2,000. And that's a significant issue, right? So those are the kinds of things that I've been involved with. I've been involved with clubs that have had to open in prisons. I've seen when I lived in China for a while. And when I was there, I was helping clubs to establish themselves when they were trying to be bilingual, because I do speak Mandarin. So I did everything I could to try to work that transition. In all of those cases and all the positive ones, I've always said, let's find a way to make this change and make the transition properly. And so in business, when we talk about just planning for disasters, I always tell people, you got to write a plan, then you got to train your people. You have to train everybody. And by testing, it's going to apply a little differently in Toastmasters. By testing, I don't mean things like, right or wrong. I'm simply saying we need to put ourselves to the test. We need to challenge ourselves. That's what I generally tell people. We need to challenge ourselves. Then when the time comes to change, that's the disaster, we need to respond in a way. We have to respond. If you do not respond, the club will collapse. And I'm going to give you an example of a club that I really liked. I really, really liked. And the club completely collapsed. And I was sad to see it go. And then lastly, you have to find ways to improve. And regardless of the kinds of disaster planning or what you're doing in life, you have to constantly improve. And as a matter of fact, of all the arrows that you see here, the one that I think that clubs do the least well is the purple arrow. That is the one that I see the least. All the other ones, do I see people planning? Absolutely. I've been in clubs that are really high flying. I went to a club that's actually nearby you guys called Diablo Champagne Toastmasters. When I was in there, they were doing all kinds of planning changes, bylaws changes. It was all very organized and very interesting. I've seen clubs that really train people well, that do all that. They have strong mentoring programs. They go through the whole thing. But then when people leave, nobody ever tries to improve because all the people who knew the things are gone. So we try to find ways of doing that. So you see, I spend a little bit of time on this because I need you to get into that thought process. And I do this when I talk to hotels and restaurants and alligator farms. And yes, I have done a disaster fund for an alligator farm. Every single place I say, here is the foundational way of thinking about it. So let's walk through this a little bit. So what are the program goals of a Toastmasters Club? Well, guess what? It's the same as a disaster program. The first is that you need to find a way to be empowering. You need to empower the people around you. And I'm going to give you some stark examples, because in this country, and I studied disaster management in Europe. I went to graduate school there, and I've studied disaster management in the People's Republic of China as well, and in other Asian countries. The place that is the Achilles heel is the fact that nobody's ever empowered to do anything. People always say, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And they treat people as if they're just tools to be used as they're building a building. And then when they're done with the tool, they just throw it away. They don't think about it. And your Toastmasters Club needs to be empowering too. We talk about that all the time. We're going to empower people to be better communicators and better leaders. And that's really what that's about. Then we talk about the operational side. What do I mean by operational? Whenever I walk into a club, first thing I do, I don't say anything. I just sit, and I'm always late. I'm always late. I make it a point to be late. I never am on time, because I want to go there when the club is starting and the club doesn't know I'm coming, but I don't want the club to try to force its narrative on me. I don't want it to do that. I don't want someone at the door going, "Hi, how you doing?" And they put that hand out just like they're a Walmart greeter or something, which is a good thing, by the way. Actually, some clubs do that very well. But I go in there because I want to get a notion of the club's zeitgeist. That's a German term. It essentially means the spirit of the times. And really what I'm trying to get the gist of is, does this club really run well? And there are times where I've been to clubs where I've said, does the club have plenty of members? Absolutely. Do they meet their goals? Sure. But really, this is not an operational club. There's about 5 people who are hyperactive, and everyone else is like the peanut gallery, where we say, hey, can you do a CC this year? Sounds good, Mr. Nobody I'm never going to speak to again, but we just need you for the CC. Hi. You know what I mean? And those are the kinds of things, and we're going to talk about that. And then lastly is realistic. I have seen clubs that are really small that are ridiculously powerful. And I'm going to talk to you about a club that I ran into in Tennessee that was very small, and wow, it shocked me. They were very effective, a really solid club. They knew each other, they knew themselves, and they said, this is what's real. This is what's going to make the club function properly. When I was it was called an area governor now. They're called area directors. But when I was an area governor, I used to do this. When I first walked into a club, because you obviously do a number of visits throughout the year. I did two in the fall, and I did 2 in the spring. And when the very first time I came in that August of that year that I matriculated into the program, and I literally would go into my clubs, and they all said the same thing to me. What are you going to want from me? What are you going to need from me? And I turn to them and I say, nothing. Absolutely nothing. I don't want anything from you. I'm not asking you for anything. You don't need to show me a piece of paper. I'm not writing anything down. All I'm here to do is to meet you. And that's it. And for those of you who are area directors or who aspire to those offices, I will tell you something. One of the most annoying things about area directors are the ones who come in and go, okay, you're going to be DCP distinguished this year. Do you understand? You're going to be that. And you go, well, wait a minute. Now, hold on a minute. That may not be realistic for this club. I mean, you have to put the club on. And besides the fact that when you show up in a club, you need to be empowering of people. That's not empowering them. That's empowering them no more than when I empower a hammer to hit a nail when I'm trying to put a painting up in my house. You know what I mean? That's no more of that. Because then when I'm done with the hammer, what do I do with it? I put it back in the toolbox until I need it again. And that's not the way I want you to view it. I want you to take a look differently, but I find that clubs do this sometimes where they're not realistic. Sometimes I see this in area leadership and again, I don't know anybody on this call unless I've run into you by happenstance somewhere, so I don't want anyone to feel like I'm singling them out. But it's the kind of thing where when you're being realistic, you have to look at a club and say, what can this club really do? And what can we do as leaders? I know that when I hire employees, I turn to them and I say, what can this person realistically do? And what can I not realistically ask them to do? Because if you ask them to do unrealistic things, you know what happens? They fail. And I know that it's a big thing in Toastmasters where we talk about failure is creative, failure is that. Well, you know what failure is also? Failure can actually disempower people. It can break them down if you are not properly empowering them and putting them in a place where they can feel like they're in an operational environment that works well, that realistically views what's going to work for them. So let's talk about your unified program at the club. And this actually is the same thing for disaster preparedness. The first one is what? Communication, right? I've been involved in disasters all over the country, all over the world. And every single time after a disaster, we write something called an after action report. That's something that we write. It's called an AAR for short. And in every after action report, we identify the things that were shortfalls, things we didn't do as well, either as emergency managers or as business continuity professionals or as paramedics or as firefighters or whatever. And the first issue is always communication. And that's what it is with clubs too. There's huge communication barriers that I constantly see when people are not unifying the program properly. And then the second is education, right? You have to be able to educate people properly. You have to make sure that you're putting people in a position so that they know what's going on. Then internal leadership is important. How many of you in your clubs, when you are putting leaders in position, how many of you, when you are evaluating them, say, I'm choosing this president because I believe that this person is someone who could lead us through a major problem. I do this all the time. When I'm training people on their disaster plans or when my employees are doing that, we always go, okay, how many of you in here? And there's always a room like 80 people or so, different people in different levels. Some are management, some are line staff, some are people in the mailroom, whatever. And I always turn to them and I say, how many of you in here think that you could be in charge of a disaster at the property? And I always get the managers raise their hand, right? But everyone else just doesn't say anything. They look away. And then I say, tomorrow, guys, we're going to run a drill. And they all say, oh, we're going to run a drill. And I said, do you know who I'm going to put in charge? And the managers always go, oh, yeah, it's going to be us, right? I go, actually, no. And I turn to everybody and I say, who in here has been with the company the shortest amount of time? Who in here has the least amount of experience? And who in here is doing everything they can to avert their gaze so that I don't look at them as if this were an episode of The Price is Right? And the person who does that, you know what ends up happening? They're the ones I choose. They are the ones I choose. And I tell them, I'm not just going to put you in charge and then make you fail. There's no way I'm going to allow you to do that. But I need you to see, I'm going to give you the disaster plan. We're going to walk through it together, and you are going to run this scene. How do they do that? I'm going to talk to you about that in just a little bit. But the internal leadership is so important because when you are putting people into these spots, I want you to think about their strengths and weaknesses. I don't want you to put somebody as president because it is, quote unquote, their turn, or it's, quote unquote, they've been so loyal to the club. That's fine that they're loyal to the club. They can continue to be loyal to the club, but this is not a dining club. This is not a social club. This is a club for education. This is something where you have to lead people, and the internal leadership is so important from that perspective. And then the other is external leadership. How many of you, and I know that districts do this a lot, and again, I'm not blaming anybody here. I know this happens. How many of you fill area director positions because guess what? Nobody else would volunteer to do it. So they just find whoever. Now those are the kinds of people who can disempower clubs. I actually had a club where when I was area director, I'm going to call them area directors, even though it was area governor back then. I'm going to call area director. When I was the area director, I went to my clubs and I met everybody, and I discovered that the previous area director had a vote of no confidence. Literally, the club I visited handed me the vote of no confidence that they had done in the area director. And then later on, that area director was banned from the club. I have been to other clubs. There's actually a club out here in Sacramento that permanently bans all district officers. No district officers are permitted in the club. Every year they get a list of the people in the district and they hand them to the security officer, and they have I don't know if there's actually been an incident, but I know that when the division director showed up, the division director was literally escorted from the property by armed security guards at the bank, because the club will not participate in district activities at any level. And the reason is because external leadership has been so vicious to them over the years that they just did not want to participate in any way. So that becomes really important. So is it important in your club to consider the position of the area director? Absolutely. When you have the area director and you're working with them, you need to figure out, is this person going to work well? Because we all know we can't control who the area directors are or the division directors and so on. So we do our best to work with them. But if they are people who are poisonous and toxic, keep them away. If they are people who are really great or people who have a lot of potential and energy, bring them in. Include them. In fact, I actually have a club where the area director was invited to every single meeting because they liked her so much. She was actually great. This was out in Plano, Texas. It was a great club. I happened to be there. They met at this really cool restaurant too. There was like a train in the middle of the restaurant. I'd never seen anything like it before. And the area director came every single time. So that was something that worked very, very well. And this is the last one, is sustainability. We also have known clubs that go DCP 10, and then what happens the very next year? DCP what? 1, 2, 3, or the club is like blockbuster, and then the very next year they begin to fall and they begin to collapse. That happens because clubs just don't create the sustainability that you need to have. Disaster preparedness is identical to that. Literally, the sustainability of the disaster program is what's going to make it effective and not effective, because disaster plans, once we print them and put them on the shelf, you have to maintain these things. If the plans are not sustainable, the plans will never, ever work. And so you have to make sure that when you are planning this stuff, when you are incorporating them, you ensure that the disaster program is going to work in the long run. And the reason why I include all these in the unified program is because the club is going to have shocks from time to time. It's going to have shocks. It's going to have problems. And I don't want to sound like I'm being doom and gloom, but too many times I hear presentations on club leadership and nobody ever wants to talk about the tough times. Everyone always wants to talk about the happy times. It's easy to run things during the happy times. It's really hard to run things during the tough times. And so that's why I want you to think about that. And the pandemic has made that very, very apparent. For those of you who work in business, for those of you who are working in some kind of a managerial capacity or in the bureaucracy, whatever it is, then those are all positions where it's sustainability and pivoting that become really, really important to that. So let me talk to you about an emergency preparedness plan that I ran into many years ago. I got hired by a hotel, and the hotel manager had hired us to rewrite the disaster plans. And so this is what the disaster plan originally said. This was literally word for word what it said. It said, step 1, inform the front desk manager. Okay, sounds good. So if you have a disaster, make sure you inform the front desk manager. Okay. Even if the front desk manager may not be there, even though they may have been injured, even though they may be in Barbados, who knows? Maybe they're gone. Maybe they're outside taking a smoke. That happens more often than you can imagine, actually. People are on break. Fill that whole thing in. Then step 2 is keep everyone calm. Okay. So we all talk about, and I'm not a big blood and guts guy. Okay. But we all talk about mass shootings, right? If I were to say to you, there's a man in your hallway with an AK-47, how many of you think that, oh, good, I'm glad the disaster plan tells me to keep calm. I'm so glad it told me that pearl of wisdom, because if I didn't have that, my natural instincts would just never kick in. And I tell people, I don't want you calm. In fact, I'm writing a book, and the book will be published January of next year. The book literally is going to have a chapter saying, I don't want you calm. I want you focused. I don't care about calm, and I don't want anybody calm. Anybody. And because people go, why don't you want us calm? Everybody tells us to be calm. And the psychotherapist told us to be calm. I said, the psychotherapist isn't running the disaster. You are. We need to be realistic. I want you to be nervous. That's okay to be nervous. In fact, when I run drills, I kind of run legendary drills because I actually do this. I turn the lights off. I take a sound maker and I make the alarm as loud as I possibly can so nobody can hear anyone else. I hire dogs, actors. I usually stick a drone in there somewhere flying around. I have people running up and down the hallways and they go, "Why are you turning my hotel into like a haunted house?" And I go, "Because if a tornado strikes your hotel, it's going to be a haunted house. It's going to be just like this, but way worse. Instead of two people screaming down the hallway, you now have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people running down the hallway. So your people are going to be nervous and we got to keep them calm. And that's really important to keep them focused, not calm. And the last step said, tell the guests to evacuate. Okay. All right. Sounds good in theory, right? So what happens if there's a chemical spill outside? Is that a disaster? That's a disaster. Should we evacuate outside, everybody? Is that the decision that we should make? You know, that's the disaster plan, trying to be all things to all people, and you can't do that. And that's the reason why with clubs, it's the same thing. I see clubs who have these rituals almost that they have. You all know some of these clubs have it. They've been around a long time, or there's that one person that knows the way, quote unquote, the club does things, and they run it like that every single time. And you know what ends up happening? That disempowers people. You see this disaster plan? That just disempowered everybody. That just unempowered the group. It made it impossible for anyone to be effective because the plan's trying to dictate to you how to do things, when instead you should be empowering people and putting them in a position to make things really work. And so, but inevitably, when I talk about plans, everybody says, okay, that's fine. But what's really the secret to true disaster preparedness? Well, everybody seems to have a different answer. Some people like to talk about the red backpack. We all know about the red backpack. You all know what I'm talking about. Is that ubiquitous red backpack that you can buy at Home Depot, that little one, which nobody ever opens, by the way. And you all know it's covered with an inch of dust at your house, or it's stuffed in the trunk of your car that you haven't driven in like a year. Or everything in there is roasting in your office or whatever. You know what I mean? Is the red backpack the secret to true disaster preparedness? The answer is no, because the backpack is a tool. The backpack is not preparedness. But I literally hear people all the time when I say, are you prepared for disasters? You know what people always say? Oh, I bought that backpack. Oh, we have one of those. Oh, and I know I have one in my office too. I'm a professor. And I said, well, does the red backpack tell you when to evacuate? Oh, no. I have somebody else who's going to tell me all that stuff. Really? Someone else going to tell you when to evacuate, what to do, how to do things? Is that their role? And they're like, yeah, they'll do this and they'll do that. And I said, absolutely not. The backpack is not enough. So what about this, though? I mean, this is something I hear too. There's like that wonder technology somehow. It's either a social media thing or it's some kind of, it's that cool app that people found on, and they said, well, we have the app and we've got the backpack. Is that really the case of true preparedness? The answer is no. And when it comes to Toastmasters clubs, it's the same thing. I hear this all the time. Well, we're following the program exactly as it's written. We're doing it precisely the way Denver wants us to handle it. Denver knows all. I go, so should we just call it the Oracle of Denver from now on? I mean, is that the way you're going to run your club? I mean, because you can't actually have that. I actually spoke at a club. I was going to use its number. I've done it a couple of times, but now I don't anymore because they get phone calls occasionally. This is a club that actually does not follow the education program at all. They don't do that. They actually are people who are from other clubs that join this club. It is strictly a debate club. That is all they do is debate in the clubs. That's it. And they do that not because they want to disempower people, quite the opposite. Because to them, they want to empower people through debate. They want to run debates in the club. So when I came, they actually challenged me. There was 4 people against me. And I basically told them, I'll give you 3 months to prep. You can prep on the topic. Don't tell me what the topic is until the very last minute. All I want is 5 minutes to prepare. I'll give you 5 months to prepare, as much as you want. And then I showed up at the club and I took on all 4 people. And I did that. Now, again, Is that following the education program? No, but it's something that's specific for them. But you know what they also accounted for? They said you had to be a member of another club so that if you wanted to be a part of the education program, you totally could. And actually, the year that they were doing that they totally switched, they had an area director who really, 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 really wanted to be President's Distinguished, and they weren't going to be president. And they told him, we're not going to be President's Distinguished. We love you, but we're not going to be President's Distinguished. And the area director was very, very angry about that. And so I tell area directors when I do these kinds of trainings, I tell them, I say, you know what, just because a club is DCP 10, that doesn't mean that they're a blockbuster club. I've been to DCP 10 clubs before that I thought, this is the sick man of the district. I mean, this literally is the sickest club I've ever seen in the district. This club's going to go away. And I've seen it happen time after time after time. So I want you to think about that stuff, that the revised education program and all that and pathways is wonderful. And I'm not disparaging it in the least. It is incredibly valuable. But don't forget that creating a true operational club, one that is going to be really effective, is not just about the technology and the stuff, and it's not about that 300-page disaster plan either. One thing about Toastmasters is that no matter what you do in the club, Toastmasters has somehow developed a manual for it, right? I mean, they've developed manuals for everything. I have the debate manual that Toastmasters actually developed. It's not that it's a bad manual. It's actually a pretty good manual. But I tell people, you don't have to do the debate according to the way the Denver tells you to. You can change this in any way you want to and do it the way you want. And you can adapt it so long as you are educating people and following it. Because just like in disaster preparedness, you hear all these big terms and everybody always freaks out. Because I always tell them about all this stuff. I say, well, you got to have a risk analysis, and you got to have an emergency response plan, and you got to have threat annexes, and you have to have business continuity plans. You have to have business impact analyses. You have to have IT disaster recovery plans. And everybody's head always spins, and they say, why in the world did I ever hire this guy? Because that's too much. And so I tell them, I want us to take this step by step. We're going to work on the things that are going to empower you best. Does that mean that I'm going to treat you the same as I treat a Fortune 500 business? No, of course not. I'm going to work with you and develop plans that are specific for you and specific for your type of organization. So, for example, I was once in Tennessee, and I was doing a disaster plan for a fraternity. And the fraternity headquarters was at one location, and then where they actually met and held meetings was at a building they owned, and I was not allowed to know where it was. So I had this interesting experience of them telling me to park in the parking lot of the headquarters of the organization, and I did that. And then two guys in a black car picked me up and handed me a blindfold and said, we're basically going to blindfold you because you can't know where we meet. And I thought they were kidding around. I'm like, where's Liam Neeson? I mean, seriously, I mean, this isn't for real, right? And they're like, no, this is for real. Like, you can't know where we meet as an organization. And I go, but how can I write your emergency plan if I don't know where you meet? And he just goes, we're just going to have to do without it. And so I thought, okay, fine. So I allowed them to blindfold me. I got in the back of this car. They clearly drove in circles because I had no idea where we were. 25 minutes later, we're in some location, and they take me out, and we go in the building, and we talk about the plan, and I talk about evacuation, everything. And then, lo and behold, they blindfolded me again, went back in the car, and they took me back to my car. And now, is that the way emergency response planning is supposed to go? No. But you know what? It adapts to what is specific for them and fits their value structure. Did I give them a plan that's going to work for them effectively? Absolutely. And I told them and gave them the necessary tools that they needed to make themselves effective. And that's what I want you to think about too, and not have to think about all the different elements of disaster preparedness as well as being in a Toastmasters International club. So here it is. This is the payoff. What is the secret to true disaster preparedness? What I'm about to show you is really the secret to how to truly prepare for disasters. I don't want you to think about what the disaster has destroyed. I don't want you to think about that because that's always the obvious thing, right? We all know what I'm talking about, right? Anderson Cooper, right? He's always there. He's always the one who is standing in front of some destroyed building or some flooded out area and saying, hey, This place has been totally destroyed. I can't believe it. This is the number of people displaced. We all know what I'm talking about, right? And then people focus on what I've lost, right? Because the media loves the human interest stories. What if people lost, jobs destroyed, everything else? You know what I tell people? I tell people I don't care about that stuff. Not that I don't care about what they lost. Of course I care about that. But I said, once we have finished thinking about that, I want you to ask a better question. Not what the disaster has destroyed, not what you've lost, is what has the disaster really revealed for you? When your club goes through a massive disaster, and I'm not talking necessarily about a flood, I'm talking about if something happens at the club that forces a massive change, you get kicked out of your building, you get, you can no longer meet there, you have to ask a club member to leave, whatever that is. What has that disaster revealed for you? What has that made possible for you and for the club? Because if you learn from it and look at that, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I'll tell you a great example, the pandemic. Everybody says, oh, I could educate my kids far better than the teachers can at the school. The school is just full of it. I can educate my kids far more. Well, guess what happened during the pandemic? They got to test that out, and people got to educate their kids at home. And all of a sudden they realized, wow, those teachers have a really hard job because I have to do my normal job and educate my kids at the same time. And some people were not prepared for that. The other thing that disaster has revealed for people during the pandemic is I have a number of people who said, I don't want to go back to the office anymore. I don't want to do that. I want to work from home. I don't want to ever go back. The disaster has revealed some other interesting things too for people. It's things that require you to come up with a brand new mindset and a brand new way of thinking about your life in ways that would have never been possible before. And so the way to get to that mindset is what I call commanding, communicating, and carrying out. And whenever you do anything, that's what I want you to think about to get to the mindset of how can this disaster reveal something new and unique for me? Taking command means taking responsibility. So you're looking at the disaster and saying, what about this? How can I take responsibility? I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to take advantage of it. In clubs that have issues, the ones that tend to collapse, and there was a club called 3033. It was a great club. The man who was in charge was guy middle-aged. The club had 60 members in it. And the gentleman, he discovered his wife was having an affair, and he had to leave the club. And when he left, there was a massive leadership schism. People were really angry that he would leave. They said, you're the one that runs the place. Within 6 months, the club had completely closed. The club that had 60 members, DCP 9 or 10 every year, because nobody wanted to take responsibility and say, this is something we need to fix. Communication is critical. Every single person in the club needs to be engaged, just like in a disaster plan. I train the CEO just as much as I train the person in the mailroom. And then carrying out means getting things done. You need to get things done. Don't wait another meeting. Don't wait 5 meetings or 10 meetings. Get it done now. If there's problems now, move it now. That's what you have to do, because you have to build this new mindset in your club. When something happens, you have to react to it. You got to respond to what's going on. You have to recover from it. You've got to demonstrate resilience and pivoting. These are all important. You have to try to reverse the disaster. Look at what the disaster has now revealed for you. I had a restaurant that I was working with, and the woman who was the chef looked very unhappy, very, very unhappy. And I was talking to her, and then I asked her a question that shocked her. I turned to her and I said, as I was writing her disaster plan, I turned to her and I said, do you really want to be a chef? And she was shocked. She's like, I've been a chef since I was 17, and she was 40. And I turned to her and I said, if this building burns down, do you want to actually recover? Do you actually want to be in the restaurant business anymore? Because you know what I'll write in the disaster plan? If this place burns down, you're not reopening. But we need to know that now. That's an important part of communication. You need to take responsibility. You've got to take that command. You got to communicate it. And that's how you're going to really make it work. And you know what ended up happening? That restaurant during the August complex fire of last year, you all know what I'm talking about, that massive gig fire, that restaurant burned to the ground. And she actually is no longer a chef. She is now studying to be a graphic artist because that's what she really wanted to do. But she was in the restaurant business because guess what? Her parents had been in the restaurant business and their parents had been in the restaurant business, and that's how it was working. So I told her, don't think about the restaurant that's lost. Think about the opportunity you now have to truly be happy in your life. Where rehearsing is really important. And as I begin to conclude, I'll talk about how you need to think about this stuff. When change happens, you need to be willing to think about how are we going to rehearse for the next one? How are we going to do that? And it doesn't mean you have to like run through it, but what it does mean is you need to think through these issues early on. If you have club members who are unhappy, you need to deal with them now. I've had club members before who have quit. We had no idea why they quit. And they said, they gave me an esoteric reason. I said, why didn't you tell me? And then you know what I realized? It wasn't their responsibility to tell me. It was my responsibility to ask the questions. And that's what you have to do. That's how you really build the mindset. It's not about looking at the club and saying, well, here's what we do good and here's what we do bad. That's not what I want to hear. I want to hear things like, here's what we're doing well, and here are the challenges and how we're going to face them. Because if we look at them as bads, we think about it as if it's something that's totally divorced from what we are normally doing. You have to go back to this original idea of looking at things, planning for them, and putting yourself through the real thing. It doesn't mean I'm expecting you to do a massive disaster program. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I mean is you putting yourself and you're empowering people and you're saying, everyone in this club has an equal stake in making it successful. I'm not going to use you as a tool, and you should not expect me to treat you as one. So each of those elements becomes really, really important. And as I go back to my original story, I think back to that true element of empowerment. That guy from the Bank of Italy who pulled that safe out, he said, I'm going to empower my community, not because people asked me, not because I wanted to wait around and I was trying to get permission. Instead, I wanted to take the initiative and find out how I could help and make my communities better. And that gentleman who ran that little Bank of Italy became so popular. In fact, 90% of the loans that he issued out were returned and paid back with interest. So much so that he was able to build his company up. And it was at one time called the Bank of Italy. Today, we now call it Bank of America. So with that, I will now hand it back to Solazar. Thank you very much, everybody.
Let's hear it for Patrick. That was phenomenal. Patrick, could you stop sharing your screen, sir?
I am doing so.
Thank you so very, very much. And now, excuse me, nobody put any questions in the chat, but I have a couple of questions for Patrick. So let's go ahead and ask him. Patrick, I'm going to spotlight you. Oh, it says you're still spotlighted, it said. So let me change here. There we go. So Patrick, I wanted to, thank you because of the way you weaved the disaster, the change, and the Toastmaster applicability to everything that you did. But I had to correct something. When I was raising my hand at the beginning, I was really trying to say I wouldn't do a pandemic plan, but I gave you the wrong answer to the right question. But I want to thank. So we're in this position of change right now. As you know, we've got our new Toastmaster year. Things have just started out. If you were walking into any club today, you've given us a whole narrative of what we could do. What would be the most critical piece of advice you'd want to give that club's leadership to say you can get more out of your club this year if you do this as a starting point?
Pretend your club is brand new. Pretend the club is brand new. Pretend the club has never been around before. These are a brand new set of members, and start over. And the reason why I'm saying that is not because I want you to undo things that you're currently doing. That is the last thing I want. Instead, I want you to look at what your club is doing and say, this is now a clean slate for me. This is now an opportunity for me to do something new. But so what kind of things do you need to do in practice? Because that sounds really good in theory, but what does that really mean? It means that you need to decide as a club, well, where do we want to go from here? What do we want to do? Some clubs have decided they are going to remain Zoom. They are not going to meet again in person. That is a good decision for that club, not because I'm happy with them being Zoom, not because of that. It's because the club members decided that that was more appropriate for them. It was the communication mechanism that I cared about the most. Because that's, I actually tell people, I say, I'm actually a business continuity planner, right? So I'm an emergency planning professional. That is a wonderful piece of advice. And in fact, it was a wonderful decision to have come to collectively as a club, because that's what you have to, those are the decisions that you have to make as a club. You have to decide what's the right thing for us. And when you develop those communication mediums, then the right decisions get made. And that doesn't mean it's the right thing for everybody. Every club's a little different. Other clubs have said, we're tired of Zoom and we want to go back to meeting in person. Some clubs have said, we're going to reevaluate, because a lot of club members aren't coming back. A lot of club members are not returning. So think of this as an opportunity for you to reevaluate the club. And you know what? You can literally take control of the club entirely and shape it the way you want it to go. Have any of you in here, just by raising, has anyone ever been to a blue club? You know what I mean by blue, BLUE? Anyone ever been to one of those? Oh, really? There's actually a great blue club. It's in Arizona. The blue club is a taboo club. So they are clubs that there's foul language used all the time. They actually encourage foul language. They use politically sensitive topics. They use jokes that are very off color, because for them, that's what they like. And there's actually a club I know in Florida that decided they were going to become a blue club, because they just wanted to do it that way. And they thought, this is a chance for us to do something brand new. And that's what they want to do. So they're literally changing the entire way they're doing the club. And they're becoming an advanced club, because that obviously is an advanced club topic. So those are the kinds of things that people want to do. And I encourage you to do the exact same thing when you are looking at your own clubs as well.
So thank you so much. That was a wonderful answer. And I want to let everyone know, if you have a question for Patrick, please put it into the chat. And remind everyone that we will formally end at 7 p.m. for those who want to formally end. But Patrick's agreed to stay a little beyond that to answer any questions that are there. Now, we do have a question from Chris Young, and he said one of the first things that's disrupted in a disaster is communication. So how would a club or any organization try to improve the reliability of their communication with their members?
Layers. That's what I want to see. I want to see layers. And by layers, I don't mean we use one of 3 apps. That's not what I mean. I mean that I want you to say, we're going to use a primary mechanism here, right, with the phones. And then we're going to use a secondary mechanism. And that is, we're going to use email or some other medium that people can use. And then maybe we do mass texting. I actually have an organization I work with. They're actually a really, really large healthcare facility in the north. And they were aghast because I said, one of the things that, and they said, well, what happens if our email goes down? Well, so what do we do then? We have a massive emails that have to go back and forth, because when you're a healthcare facility, I don't know how many of you work in healthcare. Anytime you do anything in healthcare, it has to be written down, everything, every communication, everything. And you know what I told them to do? I said, use Gmail. And they said, Gmail? Why would we use Gmail? And I said, you know why? Because Gmail will always work. Gmail will always work. So if your state-of-the-art email technology isn't working, use that. I tell people actually texting is really great. Disasters it is very, very difficult to break down texting in disasters. As a matter of fact, I was actually in Texas during Hurricane Harvey, and there was a gentleman from the New York Times who was literally, he had no way of emailing his story, so he was sending it in blocks of 140 characters at a time. And this was an article that ended up being about 2,000 words string. I mean, that's pretty long. And he was doing it because he was there. He was doing all these things. So and it was like a series of stories he was doing. So it's the kind of thing where you have to find a layered approach. The time communication really breaks down, and this is to Chris and obviously to everybody. The time is when it breaks down is when people use the wonder weapons. When they say, well, we're going to use Facebook. Facebook will always work. Actually, Facebook does not always work. Actually, Snapchat is not an ideal technology for this. Instagram is not a good idea. Because the other thing is, I've actually heard this before, where clubs sometimes put things on social media for people, and I say, they'll write things like, hey, can Jane Doe please give me a call? And they put their phone number down there. I'm going, why are you doing that? Like, Facebook is not your personal bulletin board. I mean, you don't want to be putting that kind of information on there. So I do that, and I say you need to develop these policies early. And so as you're doing that stuff, you need to put it together, but you've got to have a layered approach. And I don't care how big or small of a business you are. I've worked with the biggest of the big and the smallest of the small, and every single one I tell them, you've got to layer your communications. How are you going to do that? What mediums you're going to use? No idea. It's up to you. You got to figure it out. I mean, but there are things you can do, and there's some obvious ways. But when people say, well, what's best for me? I have no idea. You got to take your own command. You got to communicate to your people and say what's going to happen, and then get it done and choose the layered of communication. So, and that other question from Phil. Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, that's going to be a great movie. Just give me a call. Have your people call my people, and we'll create a movie for that. That'd be cool.
That's right.
Love it.
I just do have to admit for you, Patrick, how many times I've really called as Jane Doe so many times, but I never got anything back from. But one of the things you said, Henry said you've already answered his question about the basic family phone tree, but when you say every person in the club needs to be engaged,
mm-hmm.
a couple of things that go along with that is, one, how do you recommend we get them engaged? And two, in Toastmasters, it's so tough for people to recognize that you might never engage me. I may just be your club's bump on a log. And I just may be the person I'll show up, I'll be there, but I'm never going to be anything else but a seat filler. How do you recommend we still engage the club, even if we have some of those seat fillers that don't want to go along?
You need to lay out the ground rules very early on. I am different in this respect from other people. My attitude is if you're in my club, then you can't just be in the peanut gallery. You have to participate in some way. Here's the reason why. Because there are some communication and leadership topics that I need you engaged in. Like for example, I literally had a club member one time who said, I don't speak in this club. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is a public speaking club. They're like, well, I don't ever talk. And I was like, how long have you been in the club? I thought they were going to say, couple months, whatever. 5 years. 5 years. And they had never spoken in the club. And I said, you have to go up for tabletop topics. That's part of what we're doing here. And here's the reason why, because some people, and I've actually heard the debate both sides. I got into a debate. I was in a club in Brooklyn, and I got into a debate with somebody about this because they said, well, what if that's all they want to do? That's all they want to do is be the bump on a log. And I say to them, the problem with that is that spreads, and that spreads in a hurry, because what will happen is that guests will come in and say, well, you know what? It's really comfortable for me to do nothing, and so does nothing. And they've been here for 5 years. Right. So why should I do anything? And the people who are engaged, I'm not like those people. I don't want to get up in front of everybody and speak. Well, you know what's the thing? I understand that. But we need to have you engaged in that respect. But you know what that requires? You have to lay it down very early in there, because it's not fair to club members who've been there a long time and you're the new president or something. You turn and go, we're totally changing the policies in the club and you now have to speak at every meeting. I've literally had people do that before, and they practically had a coup d'etat. I mean, people were really angry because they were saying that's not what I agreed to when I signed up. But there are clubs that are more appropriate for people. But what I recommend to you is you constantly communicate with everybody what the expectations are. If you have members who just say, you know what, I've been here a long time and I'm not going to change that, you have to say to them, I will agree to that on the condition that when we have guests come in, you have to encourage them and tell them, I'm not speaking because that's what I have chosen to do, but I am not going to allow you to do that because this club is about speaking, but I've been here a long time and my goal, whatever, but you have to engage those people so that A, you're not ostracizing them, but B, you're not allowing it to get in the club. Because I've been to club meetings where people didn't want to speak and nobody spoke. And there was like 15 people in the room. I'm like, why is no one talking? They're like, well, my boss, this actually happened in a closed club. They actually said, well, I don't want to speak. Well, why not? Because my boss is in this club. So, well, I don't want my boss to hear me speak because then I'll be asked to speak in meetings. No, that's not going to happen. So you've got to, but again, that has to be laid down early enough. Because actually, I think what Victoria wrote is absolutely right, which is if you have non-participating members, it does, because I have a rule, I have a thing that every employee who works for me, which they learn this philosophy when they first start to work for my company, and I have hundreds of employees, and I turn them and I say, look, we as a company will follow the values of the lowest quality person in the company. So if you draw our standards down, everyone's standards gets drawn down as well. So that means that you need to be held to the same value standards that I as a CEO are being held to, because, and as the club leaders, I do that all the time. I actually did this with my club as area director. I turned to every club, and you know what I said to them? I said, you know what? You don't have to do a single DCP goal that I don't do personally myself during this year. Well, you're going to do 4 CCs? Yeah. Are you going to do 2 advanced communication? Yeah. Are you going to attend every training? Yeah. And if I have to do it, you have to do it. If you don't, but if I don't do it, you're not responsible for it. And you know what ended up happening that year? I got 2 10s and 2 8s. And I was the highest rated area director that year. My average was obviously 9, and that was higher. The next closest person was 6.52. And so, and that was because I went to my club and I didn't force them. I didn't say, I'm an accredited speaker. I expect you to behave this way. I've been in this organization. I didn't do that. I turned to them. I said, look, guys, let's figure out the best way to make you successful. And we're going to work on that together. And I'm going to do things. And if I do them, I need you to help correct. And when I got that buy-in, you know what I found? People really did it. But again, it's the same thing that happens at the area level. If you allow some club to just do nothing, you know what happens to all the other clubs? They go, why are you forcing me to do things when you're not forcing them to do anything? You see that problem? So when you develop the values and you say we get buy-in together, people are a lot more compliant. And Daniel's absolutely right, which is you have to be a leader. You have to lead by example. I'm sure there's a lot of great leaders in here. And that's what you have to do. Because I tell everybody, I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I would not do. And in that same year, I was actually a club president. My club actually got a 10 out of 10. And I was a club coach. And that club became a 10 out of 10. Because I turned to the club members and I said, we're going to work on this together. And I'm not asking you to get a 10 out of 10 because I want you to get a 10 out of 10. I don't care about awards or medals or trophies or plaques on the wall. I got plenty of that nonsense. All I care about is making you successful. And we did it differently for every club. So if you were to ask me, and if we had another hour or two, I literally could sit here and give you the anatomy. I remember the 4 clubs. I even remember the names of the 4 club presidents. And we literally sat together and we said, how can we work this out so that you are successful, so that you are put in a position that makes you feel as though this was a successful year. You see how I didn't talk about DCP? You see, I didn't talk about 10 out of 10 or what Denver wants or what anyone else wants. I was doing it because I want to know what you want to do. But again, that requires communication. And as Judge Judy likes to say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You should listen twice as much as you speak. So
okay, let's hold it right there for a minute there, Patrick. And I want to remind everyone, if you were planning to leave at 7, you can go. But we want to tell you that our next TLI is Tuesday, the 27th, with Freddie Dogterum, sharing the power of having and being a mentor. And that's the making of a marvelous mentor. Go to d101tm.org /TLI to get more information and register. Please do. If you'd like to hear more from Patrick, please stick around. So Patrick, let's talk a little bit. Thank you, Jackie. Put it in the chat, by the way. So take a look at that. Patrick, let's take a little bit more of any one of those 4 clubs. And would you please dissect one and tell us how you took it from start to finish in 5 or 10 minutes. You don't have to take an hour.
It was pretty much a golden boy club. I call those golden boy clubs. You run into the golden boy clubs every once in a while. We all know who I'm talking about here. It's that club that year after year, what happens to that club year after year? They get what? 10 out of 10 every year, right? And the president is a superstar and everything else. And that person is going to be the area director next year. All that stuff, right? Makes sense. Sounds good. Here's the issue, though. That club had 65 members in it, and it was massive, and it was a lunchtime club. And I thought that's all very interesting. So I need to go see this club. So I made the arrangements. I visited the club, and then I sat down with the club leadership afterwards, and I asked them what was going on. I asked them how many active members they had, and they said, well, we've got about 20 to 25 active members. And I go, let me ask you something. How many speeches are you having on average per meeting? And they say, we have 1, sometimes 2. Okay. Now, without me telling you anything else, what's the obvious problem there? What's the obvious problem? Mathematically, what's the obvious issue here? The obvious issue is what? That's not enough time for everybody in the club. I mean, I'll speak now, and then I'm not going to speak for when? Until the next ice age starts.
Yeah, that's a couple of years.
Right. It's going to be a while. So what happened was that the club was averaging, I'm not making this up. The club was averaging 7 guests a meeting, 7 guests per meeting. And so what I went to the club this club was, I want to say very confident, to the point of almost arrogance, where they were like, you don't tell me what to do. We run things the way we run things, and that's it. And the first thing I asked them was, I said, what makes you so good? I want to hear, I want to know it. Tell me so I can tell other clubs. And they gave me a few things there. Oh, by the way, if you guys want a quick tip and trick, if you want a one thing that is going to improve your club, I will give it to you right now. It is your website. If your website is updated, if your website is SEO optimized, and by the way, it is, but you have to use the tools in it. If you do that, you will jump in the Google searches. There is no question in my mind for the clubs I have visited. The ones that have awesome websites are the ones that are always sustainable and do a great job, because they're committed to it. Do you need to have a webmaster in the club? Of course. You must have one person in charge. Anyway, so this club, I was talking to the president saying, I need you guys to go to this training. I need to go to this and that. And, because if you have all these things and you're so good, I want your people to be trainers. And then I would tell the club, I'd like to think about maybe we split the club up and maybe have another club that meets on a different day, because all the people who were going to that club, I just polled the guests informally. These were just random people. I don't know who they were. And I just said, where are you from? And they were all from that business park, because they met in this business park. And I said, we need to have a second club here. And everybody was all for it. But you should have heard the invective that the club president gave me. And he was yelling at me on the phone. He was driving. He had this long commute. He had this sort of notoriously long commute. And he called and was screaming and yelling at me the next day. How dare you do that? How dare you try to steal my club? And he was crying. I'm not making this up. He was crying. And then he did what we now call today. It wasn't called that then. He rage quit. He rage quit the club. He rage quit Toastmasters. He called me and he goes, I'm mother effing done with you. I'm mother effing done with this club. I'm mother effing done with this organization. And he hung up. He didn't say anything else. He just said that. He goes, you win, Patrick. You win my blood. I'll open my veins. All the usual melodramatics. And so, which I've used on occasion on other people, by the way. And so I'm just as guilty as other people. I can identify it as much as I use it. And so then I called him back and I said, what's going on? And I'm just going to call him Jim. His name was not Jim, but I'm going to call him Jim. I said, Jim, so what's going on here? And I used his name because I wanted him to feel really comfortable with me. And he gave all his things and I just listened. I didn't tell him, how could you rage quit? How could you do this? I just listened to him. And I talked with him and I turned to him and I said, you know what? I totally agree with you. I'd feel the same way. I'd feel angry just like you. I would say to myself, why is this young guy who I don't know, who just was accredited, I don't know who that is, I don't know who this guy is, and he's coming into my club telling me how to run things. And I'd feel the exact same way you do, and I want you to know that that is not my intention at all. In fact, you know what? I want you to be my lead trainer at my next TLI, which when I was running TLI, guess what? He was the lead trainer. And I said, I want you to be the trainer for the President's Club, and you know what else I want you to do? I want you to run my contest, because I think you have that much leadership ability, but you're frustrated, you're angry. The previous area director was maybe not as good because I could tell they were being abused. And so I said to them, let's work on that together. And you know what ended up happening? He ended up being the best member I had the entire year. The club split actually was successful. He not only helped me get credit for that, I gave him the credit for opening the club, because I said to him, I want you as part of it. You know how to run a good club, so let's get you doing that with this next club. And he was really, really great about that. And we worked very well together all year. And I still keep in touch with him from time to time. I email him and see how he's no longer a Toastmaster because he's moved on. He's retired. But, he was really, really great. And he was somebody that I relied upon. look for those people in clubs, and that's how you get them turned around. Because golden boy clubs, that's what I call them, normally when they get those kinds of arrogant attitudes, and it's usually when it's either one of two things. Either the leadership has convinced itself that they're better than everyone else, or they've had a really bad experience with area leadership. So when one of those two things happens, there's different approaches. This was the approach that I took for them. As you guys can tell, I'm a listening person. I'm an emergency manager, so I listen to people and I say, how can I empower you? I'm not the hero, but I will empower you to be a hero. And how can I empower you to do that? When I write the disaster plan, I'm not doing the disaster plan. I just write it to help you be better. And when I do that with the area director, I turn to people and say, I'm not here for hardware. I don't care about that stuff. All I want to do is make your Toastmasters experience better. So I hope that kind of gives you kind of a unique case study, because I had another club in my area that was the exact opposite: small and angry, but wanted to be more, and they were just really frustrated. But that particular club, with how large it was, you do have to control those clubs too. Do not allow the golden boy clubs to take over, because what happens is that those clubs can go up and then they can go down. And so each one of those times when you have clubs that do that kind of stuff, you have to get them into an equilibrium so that they are sustainable. Remember, I was talking about sustainability. That's what keeps them in the long run. Clubs that have 60 members with 7 guests per meeting and no one ever turns into a member and no one ever speaks, you know what? I don't have to see anything else. I don't have to look at a piece of paper. I don't have to do anything. I know that club is in trouble. And he'd go, how could you say I'm in trouble? I'd say, your club is in trouble because you're not sustainable. And he would say, that's crazy. And then lo and behold, they ran into problems. And so that's what you have to do and do that. So, actually, I love what Henry has to say. I totally agree with you. That is such a great point. You are totally right. Club ownership. Matter of fact, Henry, I hope you're cool with this. I'm going to steal that because you are absolutely correct. That is an accurate characterization. I can't tell you the number of times where I go into these clubs and they say, this is what? My club. I run it. And I go, it's not your club. You're just the delegate. You're just a delegate. And you're here to empower people. You don't run the club. It's not yours to do what you want to. You're not a business owner. These are educational opportunities for everyone. Another kind of a quick tip that I can give to you is, and matter of fact, I'm creating a Toastmasters blog and I'm going to be putting up a video on this, Robert's Rules of Order for clubs that hate Robert's Rules of Order, because I ran I'm a registered parliamentarian. I've been one for 20 years. When I was in college, I was the Speaker of the House. And so I literally ran it. Now, if you think getting people into Toastmasters meetings is hard and getting people to be happy with Robert's rules, imagine a bunch, 65 kids who are 18 and 19 years old who have to sit there as you're gaveling away at stuff. That is really hard to keep them there. And there are ways and tips and tricks to do it. And so I'm going to give you guys kind of a down and dirty way of being able to use a quick guide for Robert's Rules. In fact, I think I'm going to take the 1-page guide that I created for myself. It's kind of a cheat sheet, and you guys can use that. And then guess what? You don't need that thick Robert's Rules of Order book. There's just some simple things you can learn. But I talk about that because you know why? People can get really disempowered when people use parliamentary procedure and they hit people over the head. And it's what Henry said. It's people who own the club usually are the ones that say, that's another arrow in my quiver that I can use to make sure that nobody tries to take advantage of me and no one tries to take the club from me. When instead it should be, that's not your club. We're working on this together. And that's really an empowerment message. I think that's much, much better.
So Patrick, is that something you'll make available in the future? Is there a blog that we can go to, or?
I will. As a matter of fact, if in a few weeks, I've actually going to sit down and I'm typing up my blog, because of all the 1,100 clubs I visited, I have a blog entry for every single one of them with pictures. And on top of that, I'm going to create a series of videos on how to run a Toastmasters debate, how to do Robert's Rules. And you know what else? Anything else you want. Anything else that people ask for, I'm going to create a short video for it, because there's so many cool lessons, so many wonderful things to learn, and things that I said, if people didn't know this one thing, they would not have tripped up. And there's a series of things. And for Robert's Rules, I will create a video. Expect that in about 4 to 6 weeks or so. And I'll give you guys the link to my blog. It's going to go live in just a couple weeks. And then please feel free to tell people about it, because it'll be really a thing where it's guided by you. So it's kind of a fun thing, because parliamentary procedure is fascinating and interesting, and Toastmasters clubs can be run really well. But club business, we all know, that is nobody's favorite time of the meeting.
Right. Yeah, actually, I have one final question for you before we wrap up, and it goes
Sure.
to your process for disaster. It strikes me that one of the things that you may do automatically, and maybe it's something we should do, is look at the reveal, not at necessarily what's in front of us. In other words, what's been exposed to us when we see this club? What do we see the outcome of that club? Not the behavior, but what's the outcome of it? When we see the disaster, it's not the disaster itself. What did it reveal, as you said? And it strikes me that that may be a starting point for diagnosing where we need to go next. It's kind of a question and a statement, but what do you think?
I agree. And that's absolutely correct, which is, if we had time today, I would talk about it more in depth. This is really just more of an overview thing, but you're absolutely right. That is the first step in the process. One of the things I tell people is I say, the first thing in disasters, when a disaster strikes, even if it's a medical emergency, the first thing that matters is not trying to grab the equipment. It's not calling 911. It's someone taking responsibility for the scene. Whoever takes responsibility, even if those are strangers, they're the ones who are going to see the disaster through to the end. If no one is empowered, everyone is going to suffer from what we call the bystander syndrome. Everyone's going to stand around and say, well, I'm not going to do it. Someone else will do it. I can't tell you the number of times I go to really troubled clubs, and that is exactly what I am seeing. It is a sad, sad thing. And sometimes I have to be a kind of a tough guy. As you can tell by my personality, that's not really my thing. But sometimes I have to go to clubs and say, guys, no disrespect, but this club, no one's taking responsibility, and this club is going to go away unless somebody takes clear responsibility and turns it around. And again, I make it more of a positive thing at the end, because I say, if we do that, it puts us in a place where we can be effective. But it's when people are not taking responsibility, it doesn't matter what the disaster is, it gets a lot worse. And again, as I said, we don't have time today, but sometimes I speak at academic conferences, I speak to academic audiences, and I'll go into Hurricane Katrina. I will go into large scale disasters for where people who did not take responsibility made the disaster worse. And that's really what happens in clubs as well. So each ways of those becomes very, very important. And I think there's one more question on here. Is it okay if I answer?
Jenny. Yeah, if you can.
Sure. As president of the virtual parliamentarians, that sounds really cool. I would love to speak there sometime. What do you recommend for growing more parliamentarians? For chairing more effective meetings, facilitating parliamentary debate? Oh, you speak to my heart, Jenny. You really do. You speak to my heart. For healthy conflict resolution and restoring order. The first thing that is my suggestion is that if you have a club that is in an acute crisis, I know this is going to sound a little weird, but this is just what I have found in my experience to work well. Pick somebody in the district who does not know anyone in the club, who is totally independent, and bring them in there and bring them into the club to help to mediate order and help them to figure out what's going on with that club. So if it's an acute crisis, that's what I think. From a parliamentary perspective, when I was in college, and I was actually ended up writing an article, got published by the National Association of Parliamentarians. I entitled it College Parliamentarianism, because we had a revolt when we were trying to dish out the budgets, and there were some people who gotten really angry, and I was able to restore order, and I did it through parliamentary procedure. And so this is the way that I basically do it. I say, Robert's Rules doesn't have to be complicated. It can be really fun if it really fosters debate. I tell people this about Robert's Rules. You see this huge book, because there's actually if anyone's ever seen it before, the Robert's Rules book is really, really thick. The R-O-N-R is really thick. I turn to people and I say, you know what? Don't worry about any of that stuff. Let's say you didn't know anything about Robert's Rules. Here's This is the rule you need to follow with parliamentary procedure. The minority has the right to be heard, but the majority rules. If you did nothing else but that, you would do far less harm. But the way to get people involved in parliamentary procedure, in my mind, especially younger people, is you have to make it exciting and dynamic. And so the debates have to be dynamic and keep the tempo up. That's the other thing I tell people. When I'm in, I was with the U.S. Chess Federation. I represented Louisiana for a number of years, and we'd be in the meetings, and I'll be turning to a parliamentarian saying, come on, guys, we got to speed this up here. I mean, this is running hours, and this cannot run like this. And you know what I mean? There was esoteric motion after esoteric motion after esoteric motion. People were acting like they were the Robert Byrd of this particular assembly, and they were causing a lot of issues. That is the fastest way to zap people's energy. So what I tell people is look at the club and find a really great way to make the parliamentary procedure short, easy, effective, and really keep the tempo going. I'll write a blog post on this. I actually took a metronome. I don't know how many of you have ever used a metronome before. If any of you are musicians, you know about it. I literally take a metronome in the meeting and I set the tempo and I go, you need to speak to the tempo of this. And if I speed this up, then you're speeding up. If I slow it down, you need to slow it down. And I keep that going because and the other thing is, one last thing that I have done before with colleges, I've done this exercise. I turn to them and say, let's debate something fun. Every meeting, let's debate something fun. Who's better, Batman or Superman? Or we're going to resolve that as a club. Or we're going to do something, you see what I mean? We do something, and with college kids, you can do that stuff. Is Simpsons the greatest cartoon of all time? What's the greatest movie of all? I'll pick a random movie. I'll say, this movie, Citizen Kane, is the greatest movie of all time, and someone else can amend that. Say, well, it's the worst movie of all time, or whatever. You see how that kind of keeps the dynamism going, and I find that that's the best way because there is some amount of formality you have to use. But really a lot of smiles, and it's a lot of fun if you make the debate something that people can really be engaged with. So, yeah, actually, it would be interesting because, and as a matter of fact, if you guys want me to in your club, I'll actually pull out the metronome when I come back to California, and we'll actually do it, and I'll turn the thing on, and I'll actually run it the way that I would, and you'll see when I speed it up how much faster I go. I've actually done that a number of times with the formal aspects of it, where we're going in and out, and we make it as fast as we can. So, thank you very much, Solazar, for having me today. Thank you all of you from D101. It was a pleasure being able to speak with you. If there's some other way I can assist any of you, that's really my role in Toastmasters. I don't hardly compete anymore. I don't do any of that stuff. I've been a competitive public speaker since I was a young boy. So for me, I just like helping people. And if there's some way I can make you more successful, your club's more successful, please let me know. I will be in the Bay Area quite a bit next year. So as I said, if I could visit your clubs, please do it. And one last thing, I have to say this. If any of you decide to run a debate, I am putting a challenge out. I will take on one side and your members can take on the other side, and I will debate 3 or 4 of your members. You get plenty of time to prep. I will get no time to prep, and I will debate extemporaneously. That can be so much fun. I issue that challenge to any club around the world. I've now debated, I think 170 clubs, so including one in the Bay Area, actually. So there's some wonderful clubs, but whatever I can do, any advice, I don't care. Both Solazar as well as Jackie have my contact details, and when my blog comes out, I will let you know. Please be dynamic. Please tell me what to talk about, because that's all I care about is helping you guys out. It's just for fun. I'm not making any money with it. I just want to do it because I want to help you guys. Let's just have a little fun. That's really what Toastmasters is truly about in our experiences. So thank you very much again. Thank you for your time.
Let's all thank Patrick for his wisdom and time tonight. And I'll be posting Patrick's phone number on the Facebook page for the district. So you can just pick it up from there. But want to remind everybody, our next TLI is next coming Tuesday with Freddie Doctorum. She's doing Making of a Marvelous Mentor. And just like tonight, I expect it to be another kick in the pants type of event. Thank you, Patrick, so much. This was powerful. This was wonderful. And it was truly a gift. So thank you very, very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for attending, and you have the rest of your evening back. Thank you so much.